Hey, what's going on, everyone? All right, I'll wait like a minute or two for people to jump in. Um, I haven't done a live in a few weeks, obviously. I went to visit my parents. Let me play around with the sound here. I went to visit my parents for I think 2 weeks or 3 weeks or so. So I've been gone for a little while. I saw a few people jumped in. I don't know how to pronounce your name, Reynold. I obviously know how to pronounce your name, but Sohaib. That one's tough. Just let me know how to pronounce your name, and I'll say hello. I saw a bunch of other people jumped in as well. Chad, good to see you. Good to see you guys, and hope you're doing well. Hope you guys have cool plans for the weekend. Randy, what is up? I still got to do another follow up podcast with you. I've been meaning to message you, but I've been out of town, obviously, visiting my parents for a little bit. Michael, how you doing? All is well? Michael, let me see. It's kind of hard to see the text sometimes over here. It's like so small on this phone. So good to see you guys. We will actually, Reynold, good to see you as well. So let's just get started. I'm pretty sure like a few other people are going to jump in. Randy, good to see you. Hope all is well. Let me know how the lean bulk is going. Hope all is well. And let's go ahead and get started. So we're actually going to do like an early, I'm going to have two other guests before the close of the year. One of them was actually supposed to be today, but they kind of rescheduled last minute. So I'm going to do a solo. And Frank, good to see you. And we'll be covering some early New Year's Eve goals and how you can kind of really set yourself up for success in 2023. And you're looking back at 2022, and man, it flew by. It's already month 12, obviously. Donald, good to see you. It's already month 12, obviously, and it really feels like this year has only been like 2 or 3 months long or something of that sort. So time flies, and honestly, like I always say a lot in this group, it really, and a lot of the testimonials you see me posting, it really only takes about like 4 to 6 months to really transform yourself physically, mentally, et cetera, to the point of where people like don't even recognize you anymore. Okay, and we're obviously 12 months in, and the truth is the bulk majority of people that set up their New Year's resolution goals in January, probably 95% of them don't see it through. And I'm hoping today on the live to kind of cover some aspects that you could really focus on to really help increase the chance of success in 2000 next year, which is maybe like 3 weeks away at this point, or less than 3 weeks away at this point, and really help increase and accelerate your chance of success in that year on whatever you're trying to do, physically, mentally, et cetera, et cetera. And at least from like a physical fitness perspective, the theme I'm going to try to get across, especially today, is the importance of really seeing your fitness goals way above and beyond just needing to change your diet and workout routine, and kind of looking at it holistically in total. So I'm actually just going to go out of order today. I do have a list like always, just so I don't forget what we want to go over. And I'm going to go out of order today, so I'm just going to do randomly. But before I do that, just remember, and I include myself in these statements as well, be careful with following any, Bebo, good to see you. Be careful with following any advice online, including my advice. Tim, what is up? We got to do a catch up podcast pretty soon. I saw your travel pics, they look pretty cool. And be careful with following advice online. Because inevitably, even if the social media personality is very competent and does have the best in mind, inevitably they never like met you. And because nature is a novelty generator, each person is uniquely different, and there are no two of you on the planet Earth or in the universe, for example. So just like on even like a single tree or even a single bush, like every single leaf in that bush is completely different. There is no one, there is no two of exactly of the same kind of leaves. So it's the same with you, and obviously if they never met you, how do they know your situation? How do they know your background? How do they know what you're trying to achieve? Patrick, good to see you, et cetera, et cetera. And it's the same as like basically you walking into a doctor's office and they never even heard you speak or express like what's going on. And they're like, here, just take this medication. And obviously your natural reaction will be like, whoa, even your nurses or even you haven't even spoken to me. How do you know what's going on? And you're already prescribing this solution. And that's exactly what's happening when you're seeking information online. Especially, you have to remember that and it's not your fault. You might have other interests in mind, don't get me wrong, but you might not know a lot in that area. So anyone can kind of sound like very, very competent, wise, or kind of guru-ish. And you might unfortunately fall for that kind of spell and follow their advice, etc., etc. So just be careful. And I'm not even excluding myself from this argument. Obviously, I never met a lot of you guys here. I mean, I have a few of my former clients on this call here, in one of my current clients right now. But for a lot of you guys, I never met you. So obviously a lot of the advice I'm talking about here is really stuff that I cover with my clients, and I specialize in specifically kind of focus on how it could be applied to their specific situation. And each situation is different. That's why the work kind of remains interesting, because there are no single algorithms or equations that work for every single person, and every person's situation is different. So you have to approach that difference there. So just keep that in mind, okay? And it's also very easy to take information out of context in a social media setting. You're like, well, this person quoted a bunch of studies, et cetera, but if you go read on those studies, like for example, they'll always have like some kind of statistical variance. Are you gonna specifically hit into that statistical variance, Or are you going to be one of those that had no effects, or maybe a negative effect from that procedure? Because if you look at any sample pool, like for example, like a very common one is back traction devices, like where you're hanging upside down to relieve stress or to relieve compressive load on intervertebral discs, for example, or maybe stretch out ligaments or tendons a little teeny bit, et cetera, et cetera. If you look up a lot of those studies, if you look up meta-analysis, it shows that there's no difference whatsoever. But if you look up a lot of individual studies of that that are included in that meta-analysis, you'll see that there are variances. Some studies show there is effect. Some studies show that it actually made it worse. And if you look up even any of those individual studies, you'll see there are individuals in that sample pool that saw no results from doing that, but then there are individuals that did experience pain relief. And there are also individuals that when doing traction, it actually made their pain worse. So you have to look up a lot of these details, and just because they're quoting studies and able to sound like very, very sophisticated, it's still, who knows if it applies to you, okay? So you have to be very discerning with what you listen to. And yeah, just like Bebo mentioned, what he mentioned right there, so much information out there, it gets so confusing, you don't even know what to follow anymore. Exactly. And a lot of it, you have to remember, is marketing based. Inevitably, they want you to buy into a program, and most often they just want you to buy some kind of supplements or anything. At the end, they always have some kind of supplement spiel or something of that sort. Then you definitely have to be like wary of that. There's definite conflict of interest there, okay? So you got to know yourself best, and inevitably your gut instinct will follow you in the right direction, because if you're not getting better, then obviously you have your answers right there that you need to keep searching, et cetera, et cetera. So let's cover one thing at a time. Just going to go out of order. So one thing that could definitely help you in 2013, and you could honestly even do it right now at the close of the year, because you could actually use 2022 as a reflection for that, is just calculate how much you're spending on non-essential expenses. This sounds totally irrelevant and kind of a little silly, but it actually plays in a huge factor in terms of determining what you're spending your money on, and that would help reflect on if that reflects on your current core values. So I do this a lot with clients, and basically what you'll see is the average American spends about $8,000 to $16,000 a year on non-essential expenses. So non-essential expenses in this context being defined as, going out and eating with coworkers, subscription services, the new iPhone, maybe designer jeans or something of that sort, alcohol, maybe drugs of various sorts and stuff of that sort. So I know when I mention these numbers, a lot of people deny it or don't believe it. They're like, oh, there's no way I'm spending, $8,000 to $16,000 a year on going out and eating and alcohol and maybe cigarettes or whatever, iPhone. But if you honestly, like, this is the weekend, so a lot of you definitely have a decent amount of free time. If you sit down and really honestly look over your expenses, You will see it is actually between 8 to 16,000, 8,000 on the very low end. I very rarely run into people that are below that, at least people that are contacting me for coaching. And honestly, most of the time, actually, it's way more than $16,000. Okay. And in this number, I'm not even counting travel, for example, which could add another two, three, four, five, even $10,000 that year. You know, if you're traveling to Western Europe, it's obviously going to be pretty pricey versus going for a local hike at Zion or et cetera, which isn't that much, but even like a 4 or 5 day trip, even if you kind of budget it, could still cost you, $500-600, et cetera, et cetera. So calculate those and then ask yourself if those expenditures are really, Lisa, good to see you. Thanks for jumping in. If those expenditures are really adding any value to your life or are reflective of your core values. So from my observation, especially when I do this practice with clients, typically a lot of these expenditures really just add to the person's things that they don't want anymore in their life. So they typically add to their, obesity, misery, and disease in ways of just kind of numbing. These purchases are just ways of kind of numbing themselves out, oftentimes unconsciously, for example, a client would complain about gut issues, poor quality skin, excess body fat, like around the lower chest or the gut, for example. And right after that complaint, they would go out and go to some unhealthy place when they eat out. And honestly, it's very hard to eat healthy, even when eating out, even when going to a high-end place, because inevitably they're going to be using a lot of industrial seed oils and a lot of sauces with random GMOs, definitely probably not organic sauces, or butter that comes from like grain-fed cattle that are given God knows how many, that eat a tremendous amount of grain that is raised with God knows how many synthetic biocides that are, many of which are proven to give you cancer, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's very impossible to eat healthy when eating out. You could get like certain sushi or sashimi type things, and that might work, but it is possible, but it's very difficult. That's what I'm saying. And it's also very expensive because once again, just literally, of course it requires honesty, and a lot of people aren't ever going to do that, obviously, but then they wonder why they're in endless cycles of obesity, misery, and disease. Just look over your expenses this weekend and see how much you're just spending on eating out. And for most people, just eating out is probably a $6,000 to $8,000 a year expenditure. It's very pricey. I mean, a single meal could be like 15, 20, 25 bucks with the tip. Then you got to count, the gas it took you to also drive over there, drive back. Some states, they even have like an extra tax on eating out, et cetera, et cetera. And all that stuff adds up, man. It doesn't seem like too much day to day, but it adds up, especially if you factor in how much you spent that whole entire year. And you will see it is around $8,000 to $16,000 a year that could probably be spent on way better things, I mean, the list is endless. I'm not like a financial guru or anything, but some things that come in mind are like, maybe spending it on a positive cash flow asset. So using that money to give you money, like getting a rental property and renting it out or something of that sort. So you don't have to keep working to attain money, but you have some kind of at least positive cash flow coming in from somewhere that requires very few hours to maintain after it's set up. Or maybe just saving, maybe just saving for a rainy day so that, like, hey, if I don't like this job, I don't like this career path, you know what? I could actually take 3, 4, 5, 12 months, 2 years off because I have the savings plan, going on. And I don't have to keep putting up with this boss, or I don't have to keep putting up with these annoying and kind of backstabbing coworkers that are just obnoxious to be around. Or I don't have to be dependent on someone. I could just be dependent on myself and have that self-assurance and stuff of that sort. Or even, although there's a little bit of conflict of interest here, obviously, because I am a holistic life coach, specializes in fat loss, maybe just hire some kind of holistic life coach or like some kind of mental coach or business coach or something of that sort, depending on what you're trying to achieve at that given time in your life. I mean, think about it. what has really all those non-essential purchases done for you in the grand scheme of things, except provide sugar highs at best, you know? Like imagine like, dude, these days, one of the biggest life upgrades you can have is just an amazing looking physique and great health and great mental health and spiritual health. I mean, that's rarer than anything else, especially in a society today where like 9 out of 10 American adults are metabolically unhealthy. Half of the American population develops cancer within their lifetime and half of it dies from it. We have close to 800,000 people just dying from something super preventable as a heart attack every single year. And I guarantee you a lot of blood pressure issues, heart attack issues, and stuff of that sort, 99.999% of the time, it's nothing to do with genetics. It's just the person is living like is making very poor choices that aren't in tune and conducive to living a health conscious lifestyle. And their scapegoat is cognitive dissonance is playing the genetics card. But trust me, it's not the genetics. It's just them doing it to themselves and kind of wanting to stay in loops of not wanting change, but not actually wanting to change anything about themselves to actually see that change happen. And then they take like blood pressure medication and anti-anxiety, antidepressants, all that stuff, and wonder why they keep kind of looking and feeling worse year after year, although they're on all this like high-tech medication, which is really just honestly doing nothing but numbing symptoms for the most part and not really changing the behavior that led to any of those things. So, I mean, going back to here, like, what do you think would benefit you more? Spending $8,000 to $16,000 on just junk food, restaurant food, alcohol, or, you know, like hiring a life coach that can help you develop like an amazing looking physique and honestly help you actually save a lot of that money. Because what I found with my clients is, let's say they came in spending $8,000 to $16,000 a year, but due to the lifestyle changes in the program, that was probably cut in half or even more, just simply due to the lifestyle change. It's not even counting medical expenses. As you guys seen me interview many clients in this group, a lot of them are on 4, 5, 6, 10, 15 different medications. And obviously the medical expenses for that are pretty high, having to, you know, pay the deductible, go to all the professionals, the time expenditure of that, et cetera, et cetera. And at the end of the day, they were just getting worse and worse and not actually better until they implemented a lot of the holistic health principles we're covering here, which is a lot of the stuff I do with my clients to various degrees. So that's one thing I would recommend, and definitely do it so you don't continue these kind of non-essential expenditures in 2023 and then wondering why you're just staying sick, you know, overweight, not looking the way you want to look, and also probably broke as well because you're spending your money on all the wrong stuff that's not benefiting you, but benefiting like a company or something. Because unfortunately, just a lot of Americans or people in Western culture have been brainwashed to believe that the stuff that is not important is most important, and the stuff that is important is not important. So for example, ask yourself this honest question, like what would you honestly be able to accomplish if you don't optimize your mental and physical health? You know, like what can you really do with major depression or when you have low back pain, or how are you going to optimize your health when you're just like very overweight and you have like a lot of lower chest fat and this huge gut hanging over your belt line? Like what is that like Mercedes purchase really going to do? Is that really going to fill the void in your heart that's leading to that overeating or those health problems? Or, you know, what is this, you know, this next meal, this junk food meal that's basically used as comfort food? I mean, is that really going to fill the void in my heart and reduce the stress that I'm feeling in my life or the emptiness I'm feeling in my life? I mean, the answer is an obvious no, but people are just constantly, you know, like working really long hours and stuff of that sort in pursuit of a lot of like materialistic things. There's nothing wrong with the materialism, but just unfortunately, a lot of people allocate all of their time to the accumulation of money for the accumulation of those things at the expense of their mental and physical health as well. They're completely falling apart, but they continue to participate in behavior and put in a lot of hours into the accumulation of money so that they can actually get those things. And then, you know, they get it, it provides like a sugar high at best. And then, you know, 2 or 3 months later, they're back to exactly where they started. With the realization that they're still miserable, still feeling empty, still very overweight, still very sick, on a lot of medical drugs and stuff of that sort. And then they get into this kind of like foolish mentality of like, oh, it's going to be the very next thing. When I purchase the very next thing or get the very next promotion or get that very next paycheck, then I'll be super happy and everything will work out and everything will fall into place. And, by the time you hit like 25, 30, or 35, you realize that's not going to be the case, okay? And accumulation of more accomplishments or more things is not going to do much for you. So be conscious of where your money is going. Number 2 is I would highly recommend not numbing out the pain teacher and just being very consciously aware of the pain teacher and what it's trying to tell you. So I got this phrase, the pain teacher, from Paul Chek. Joel, good to see you. Felix, Alvin, good to see you guys. Ven C, let me know if I pronounced your name right. Good to see you as well. Pain teacher, I got this from Paul Chek, obviously. And this is a really good practice that really helps people be consciously aware of what their body is constantly telling them. Because unfortunately in Western society especially, we've been kind of brainwashed to believe that, like, for example, this is just one example, one arbitrary example, but there are many that we could go off. We've been trained to believe that kind of, if you're not dying for your job, you're not doing your job, and because of a lot of this unconditional kind of programming, in a sense, to survive in this kind of unhealthy and unhealth conscious environment, a lot of people end up just numbing out a lot of the signals of pain they get to their body. So an example of this is like a person, is overworked and has a lot of anxiety or high blood pressure. And instead of obviously, setting healthy boundaries at work, most likely just finding another job, working remote instead of in person, they just take high blood pressure medication or they just take anti-anxiety medication. And this is the equivalent of, instead of, you have a rock inside your shoe, and instead of rock inside your shoe that's causing pain, and instead of taking that rock out and walking pain-free, which is obviously like what a small child understands to do, the grown educated adult, I say that in very heavy quotes, educated adult, instead of taking the rock out, what they do is keep the rock there and take painkillers instead and continue to walk with that rock inside their shoe. And that's one just very easy to understand example of the idiocy of kind of avoiding the pain teacher, because inevitably, remember, medical drugs all have side effects. They're all dangerous side effects. That's why typically what you see is people in their like 20s, they start with like 1 or 2, then in 30s, they're like at 4 or 5, then in their 40s, they're like at 6 or 7, then in their 50s, they're like at 8 or 10. And most of these drugs are honestly just to counter the negative side effects of the original drugs they started with. But all of that could have been avoided if just the person took the rock out of their shoe and just decided to walk pain-free, which does take a little bit more thought, which does take a little bit more effort, but it's really the only way to be healthy, because the only way to be healthy and optimize your looks, optimize your happiness, is to ironically be healthy. So you have to do what healthy people do. And some of the things that healthy people do are the stuff that we're covering, these general ideas that we're covering on this live today. And here's the problem. These concepts are actually very easy to understand. They're super easy to understand. It doesn't take a genius to understand them, but the power isn't in the intellectual understanding of these concepts. It's the actual application of these concepts in the real world. That's where you get the benefit of the knowledge. So as like, I heard this from Paul Chek, but I don't know if it's his quote, like knowledge isn't power, applied knowledge is power, okay? And it's very, very true for a lot of mental and physical health. Just because you intellectually understand it doesn't like literally mean anything. I mean, you're not going to be like a teacher presenting this information. You want to apply it successfully for yourself and reap the benefits. So you have to go above and beyond just convincing yourself like, oh, because I understand these concepts, that means that's all there is to it. But no, it's the consistent application of these concepts week after week and molding and mastery of them to your specific situation week after week. That's where you're going to get all of the benefits, not necessarily just understanding them, okay? Application. And follow people that have learned to apply it themselves as well, okay? Because you don't want to be, taking health advice from a very unhealthy doctor just because they have a degree. A lot of doctors I found are just as overworked or drugged up or exhausted and lost in the world as a lot of the patients they're trying to treat. So obviously, if they haven't figured out how to do it, how are they going to teach you how to do it? But then on the other hand, you also want to, once again, be careful with a lot of people that are able to do it for themselves, but not for other people. So like a lot of times they would just do what worked for them personally, and then overgeneralize and say this is going to work for everyone, where it's not the case. That's why it goes back to one of the very first things I mentioned on this live is be careful who you follow online. Because once again, most just aren't credible, but the ones that are just never met you. So obviously, if they never met you, they don't know your specific situation. And even something as simple as like you have, let's say these two males, Frank, good to see you. Let's say these, Preston, good to see you. Let's say you have these two males and both are like 20. I've done lives on this before, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but both are like 20 pounds overweight and they're twins. But the reason one gained the 20 pounds is most definitely completely different from the reason the other gained the 20 pounds. So their approaches must be completely different as well, where the social media guru might go like, oh, you have 20 pounds, just do this. I'm like, whoa, you never even met this person. One of them could be eating excessively. Let's say both are even stress eating. We've concluded that, but one could be stress eating because they have a stressful job that has too many hours, and one could be stress eating because they had a traumatic childhood experience of some sort, So obviously the approach, especially when you get to the etiology of that cause, is completely different. And even that person that's continuing to work that stressful job and using food to cope with the stress, you have to even dive deeper on that. Maybe they had a traumatic childhood experience. Maybe they're having a lot of shame around what's going on, and to cope with that shame or that rupture between their true self and false self, they're eating quite a bit and stuff of that sort. I mean, you could expand on this indefinitely, but my point being is just it's not easy. And if anyone gives you any kind of like absolutes, like just do this, this diet will always work, this diet won't either, will never work, or just take this approach. There are two things that are happening. Most often the person is just incompetent. On occasions they are actually competent but have malicious intent behind their message. So they're trying to like oversimplify or maybe scare you in some way to once again, at the end of the message, you hear some kind of, oh, but buy this supplement, it'll help you. Or do this or that. Just to give you guys an idea, 99% of supplements are bullshit. They don't do anything. And it's the same, in my opinion, with medical drugs. All they do is enable the person to keep doing the behavior that led them into that problem to begin with for a little bit longer, until the side effects of those medical drugs kick in. Then they get even sicker and they need more drugs. It's just kind of like a downward spiral. So my point being, going back over here, is just get used to listening to the pain teacher. If you have anxiety, don't take, in my opinion, at least I wouldn't, take like anxiety medication. Get to the etiology of what's causing my anxiety. Oh, I'm working too much, or I have this bad relationship, or I'm not managing my finances correctly, or something of that sort. Solve it from there up. If you solve the problem of what's causing the problem, then that initial problem or that symptom is going to go away. And anxiety, depression, anger, high blood pressure, poor cholesterol ratios, excessive body fat around the chest, around the midsection, cancer in the extreme, these are all symptoms, okay? And I've done an etiology tree many times on various other lives, so I'm not going to dive super deep into it now. But these are all symptoms, and these are all your body's way of crying for help. Your body is desperately trying to tell you, like, you need to stop approaching life the way you're currently approaching it. Sometimes you need to just completely change your goals altogether because you're headed in the wrong direction. And if you're working very hard in the wrong direction, you're just running very fast in the wrong direction, so getting further away from what you're actually trying to do. And you want to be very careful getting stuck in those quicksand cycles, because if you stay on those wrong paths long enough, just naturally due to cognitive dissonance, you're going to start building up philosophies that are going to justify that type of pathology, and it's going to lead you down like a world and a lifetime of mental and physical pain, basically for your whole entire life. And unfortunately, this is going to negatively impact literally everyone around you, because obviously if you're not happy, if you're miserable, that's going to reflect on everyone around you as well, including your loved ones, even if it's not intentional, because you're not showing up as your fullest self, and you're not showing up as your true self either. You're kind of being an actor, and no one ever really knows who you are, because you're showing up and you're kind of putting on this kind of like Joker smile, Joker from the Batman. That's what I'm referring to. Like he had that painted smile where deep down inside he had like a lot of pain, shame, anger, depression, etc. But it was like a mask, you know. It was very very symbolic in that movie, and a lot of people live like that. And they, once again, instead of listening to their many body's many cries for help, one pharmaceutical after another, relying on drug dealing doctors. That at the end of the day, I mean, if the doctor really cared about you, if you came in with anxiety, for example, they would be talking to you about holistic health and how to get to the etiology of that problem, instead of talking about the symptom of anxiety, and then what kind of dangerous medical drugs you need to take to numb that symptom out. But remember, it doesn't work that way. You have to approach the problem head on and get to the etiology of it. Because if you don't listen to your body's many cries for help now, which might be a little bit light, and you could possibly ignore them, they'll just get louder and louder and louder every year until you can't ignore them at all. And then you have to take action at that point, but often at that point it's very, very difficult, sometimes even in late stage cancer impossible, and it's too late. That's it. Game over. And it could have been easily prevented if you're moreover in a mindset of getting to the etiology of the problem instead of constantly managing symptoms and stuff of that sort. So huge perspective change. And is it easy? No, it's not easy. But is it what you need to do to really find true health and happiness and look your best in life? And thus attract your best too, you know? Energy attracts energy, you know what I mean? If you're constantly slumped over, depressed, if you're very sick all the time, if you have like huge lower chest fat, huge gut, not that many people are going to be attracted to you. I know it's harsh, I know, but it's just true. And if you just stop managing symptoms and really got to the etiology of what's going on and you know what's going on internally and what type of void is there, you'll be able to come to concrete resolutions. And most likely you will have to reach out to mentors. So be open to that, okay? Because mental and physical health isn't easy. And you have to look at it this way. A lot of times you just need a mentor. I've hired many myself, and I know there's sometimes you hire a sucky one. That's the risk you take. But you have to keep looking then. And if you find the right one, it really does accelerate your progress. And you do have to remember that mental and physical health takes decades of study to fully understand. It's way harder than, I would say, even building a rocket. Okay, a lot of times you hear this saying like, oh, it's not rocket science, but really it should be, oh, it's not mental or physical health field. Like that's the challenging stuff. And in fact, like even if I gave you a car manual, for example, of how to construct a car, and it had all the answers in there, which tools you need to buy, which parts you need to buy, etc., which licenses you need to get, like how many people would actually be able to take that car manual and construct a car themselves? Without, of course, investing a tremendous amount of study time into doing that. Although clearly all the answers are there, you know, but you guys know that's not how it works. So if you do want to come to a complete resolution of whatever you're struggling with, I mean, you have like a few distinct options, two mainly. One, you become your own mechanic, which I definitely advocate for. But just know, you know, reading Yahoo articles and following some random clips online or TikTok, that's not the right education. Even if you're following a competent person, which is very hard to find online as well. The right education is more like this. Start with reading, 2 to 3 books on a given topic that you're struggling with currently every month. Do that for a whole entire 2 years on that subject alone. In the meantime, try to go to like 1 or 2. Once you start reading more, you'll be able to decipher and ask better questions and more clear questions that are going to give you better answers. And then once you're able to ask more clear questions, start looking around for courses. Sign up for these courses. Take the courses. And then eventually you'll find out that you will need a mentor, but you'll know with that education, you'll know how to better seek out a good mentor versus like a social media phony. And you'll be able to decipher and see these guys very quickly and hire the right ones for you. So become your own mechanic. That's a definite solid path, but just know it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. And at the end of the day, it's going to cost quite a bit as well, for all those books, the courses, et cetera, et cetera. Or you could just find a great mentor and hope you land on the right one initially if you don't know a lot about the subjects. And that would be a huge plus for you. It'll be very accelerated. It'll get you from A to B much, much faster than you'll be able to do it yourself because they have, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years under their belt of mistakes and experience, et cetera, and they can help fast track that journey for you. So 2, listen to that pain teacher. 1, we mentioned calculate your non-essential expenses. It's probably going to be between $8,000 to $16,000, and see how those expenses, are they really adding anything to your life, or can you do something better with that money? 3, we talked about this so much on other podcasts, but try to, one of the best things if you're confused about what to do for your diet, because some people are saying this stuff, some people are saying this stuff, some people are saying that. Overall, there's a time and place for anything, but generally speaking, like some kind of like omnivore-ish diet is right for the bulk majority of the people, at least at the healthy stage of their life, okay? When you're actually trying to be healthy. And I'm not here to tell you which type of omnivore diet, which your ratios should be, because that's going to depend on the person's gut health, their goals in life, their current goals at that moment in their life, et cetera, et cetera. But one thing you could do is just focus on the general overlapping rule is focus on actually sourcing high quality whole food. So I would recommend a good step in the right direction for most people is just sourcing at least USDA organic certified food initially. There's way better quality stuff than that, but it's a great step in the right direction for the bulk majority of people. And the USDA organic is very simple. You'll see a circular logo and it'll say USDA organic. It's typically like green or black. And you want to buy that stuff. And remember, sometimes people are like, well, I don't have money for organic. Well, that goes back to step 1. Go look over your expenses and you will see you're spending $8,000 to $16,000 a year on activities that are just making you overweight, miserable, have poor skin, et cetera, et cetera. And that's way more than what organic food costs per year for, like, for example, a 2,000 calorie diet. Way more. So you have the money, you're just allocating the money in the wrong ways. You're moreover falling into most likely some kind of, I hate to use this word because it kind of sounds cheesy, but some kind of corporate programming, brainwashing. You're kind of brainwashed to believe that, being fat, sick, miserable, broke, and overweight is acceptable. And it's not acceptable. And medical drugs, in my opinion, aren't going to be the path to health either. All they're doing is just literally numbing out your symptoms and allowing you to keep being the person that led you to problem ABC, whatever that may be. So if you want to know more about that, there are many great books online, many great resources online as well. I've done many podcasts on this where I just give away literally hundreds, if not thousands of dollars of free nutrition information about how to source legitimate organic food. You can check that out. If you want, you could also support me by getting my book on Amazon, Anti-Factory Farm Shopping Guide. It's like a red cover with a little pig graphic on it. So there are some great resources for you, okay? So you can know how to decipher between the labels and buy the legitimate stuff versus the kind of greenwashed stuff. So another thing you can do is prioritize sleep. This is huge, and meaning try to sleep between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. So remember, your body repairs itself physically between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. and mentally between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. So try to at least get solid sleep during that time interval. Even if you're not used to it, just get in a habit of a bedtime ritual of getting to bed around 9:30 and actually sleeping at 10, not getting to bed at 10 and then you're really falling asleep at 11 p.m. And then if you factor in your weekly average, you've lost about 7 hours of physical repair time per week. And then you wonder why you feel like you don't recover from workouts well, you feel sluggish, your sex drive kind of feels whatever, all that stuff, okay? It's in the details. Once again, like I mentioned, all this stuff is easy to understand intellectually. That's not where the challenge is. Even, good to see you, all this stuff is easy to understand intellectually. That's not where the challenge is. The challenge is actually applying this stuff in the real world and not standing in your own way of progress, which is the biggest culprit for a lot of people, because a lot of people are, they're doing it to themselves. Whatever health problem they have or weight problem, they're doing it to themselves. But like I always say, if you're doing it to yourself, you can stop anytime, okay? And don't be, once again, one of these people who are like, oh yeah, I'll stop next month, or I'll stop the month after, or I'll stop the month after. And then you're like 50 years old, okay, I'll do it at 60. You're 60 years old, okay, I'll do it at 70. And they just kind of get worse and more sick and more miserable over time. Another quick thing you can do, and yeah, regarding sleep, I mean, that's easy, you know, that requires no money, and it's probably literally one of the biggest health upgrades you can get is really optimizing your deep sleep. If you have things like psychologically induced chronic insomnia, frequent nighttime urination, I've done podcasts on this before. So check out those episodes. If you don't know how to find it, just send me a comment below and I'll try to post it in the group later on today or something like that, okay? So try to reduce toxic load as well. So the average newborn born in a metropolitan area in America these days is born with trace amounts of 200 different synthetic chemicals in their bloodstream already, which is staggering and ridiculous to think about, especially for newborns that typically have, they do have a lower metabolism than a large adult, for example. So a lot of those chemicals, they have a bigger impact on their physiology than it would, for example, an adult. So reducing those, I mean, the list is really endless, and this is a big part of my program as well, teaching clients how to do this. But some really surface level stuff are just stop eating out of plastic, you know, stop microwaving or heating anything up in plastic. That's already a huge step in the right direction. Try to get glass containers, preferably with like a bamboo cover or something of that sort. They sell those at Amazon. I don't know if they typically sell the bamboo cover in most stores. I haven't seen it, but they definitely do sell it on Amazon. But even just glass containers are already a huge step in the right direction. Once again, just going at least in a legitimate organic diet is one of the best ways to reduce your toxic load as well. There's a lot you can do there, but those are some great options. I personally try to use like the sauna for about 45 minutes a week because it's a little bit of a drive for me. I just do it in one session, but I've been doing it for a long time, you know? And a sauna and sweating a lot or drinking a lot of water is a great way to get a lot of these, especially like estrogenic chemicals out of your system. And remember, the higher your toxic load is, typically the more body fat your body will create, because it tries to desperately get all those toxins away from its organ tissue, which is what it prioritizes typically over the rest of your body. So for example, you could live without your right arm, but not your liver, for example. So the body creates a lot of fat stores externally, and some studies showed that a lot of these chemicals, especially the estrogenic chemicals in high enough load, could make males more inclined to have like gyno, you know, for example. So it's kind of like unsightly lower chest fat. That really lowers a lot of people's self-esteem a lot, especially with males, because you can kind of always see it outside of their shirt, and it's kind of really tough to hide it after a certain point. So, but I found just decreasing a person's body fat overall a great way to decrease a lot of those estrogenic chemicals using saunas, etc. And then also just stopping the inflow of those chemicals by learning about proper food sourcing and stuff of that sort. So another thing you can do is learn to put yourself first. And you got to be, at the end of the day, you got to learn to be selfish a lot of times. And I know it sounds counterintuitive or probably not what you're used to hearing. You're used to probably hearing like, you got to put everyone else first. But it's a recipe for disaster long term when you do that. And if you don't believe me, literally go outside anywhere in America these days, and you will see that 9 out of 10 people are just, they look very miserable. They look like way older than they actually are. They're not doing well. They're very overweight. And these are all symptoms of a lot of misery going on in the person's life, because like there's more to happiness obviously than achieving like a good looking physique and health and stuff of that sort. But typically, a lot of that, pharmaceutical use, a lot of that just being overweight. I mean, it's typically a symptom between some kind of rupture of their true self and their false self. And the wider the gap, like I mentioned before, the wider that story gap, just the more mental and physical pain they're going to feel in their life. And obviously, if that story gap isn't acknowledged, it's numbed out with a bunch of pharmaceutical drugs, workaholism, that's used oftentimes to numb people out. They get, super addicted to quote unquote, like socially accepted forms of medication, working crazy hours because without that job, the person is reminded that they're actually completely empty and they're not on the right path in life, or they have a miserable household or something of that sort. So they kind of just disappear in their work because it's more socially acceptable and more possibly financially rewarding as well. But nonetheless, it's one of those quicksand misery cycles, and just be careful on falling into those, because you're in for a world of hurt if you continue that path. So my advice is put yourself first. Like, what's the worst that can happen, And also, if you put yourself first and you kind of know your core values, you don't grow disgruntled. That's really the only way to get something to last long term. You don't grow disgruntled or bitter towards your job or whoever you're with, your partner maybe, et cetera, et cetera. Because if you don't, and let's say your core value is working remote for a job, for example, maybe it's not, I'm just using this as an example, but you're forced to work in person, there's a disconnect there. And that's one that might not do you in, but usually, there's other ones. You got the annoying coworker, you're sitting in front of a computer all day instead of really, you just want to be at the beach or something like that, or just enjoying your life more. You're dealing with, like typical managers in corporate offices or above are just very mentally and physically unwell themselves. And that's one thing that kept me out of the employment force. Is I saw this at an early age when I was still in UCI and doing coaching, University of California, Irvine, and doing coaching just part-time. I already saw these huge red flags of, managers, district managers, and they're just not doing well. They're not doing physically or mentally well. They have a lot of health problems, like mental issues as well. And just because they're, able to do their work well, that's irrelevant. It's like you're still working for that person. They typically have poor communication styles as well, because they had those type of communication styles in their families, and then they talk to you that way. Although those same communication styles led them to all the problems they're facing, they don't like, but they just don't know anything else. And it's just a mess. And you want to be conscious of these things, okay? Because they all add up to the kind of micro stresses, as I refer to them very often on lives. And the central nervous system, once again, isn't good at dealing with a lot of these micro stresses. And you'll fall apart, having to deal with that day in and day out for 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week. One thing I found worked great for the bulk majority of clients is, if not getting out of corporate work, at least trying to go remote or something like that. So you can kind of create some kind of distance and space and save yourself also about an hour to 2 hours, maybe a day of driving back and forth. That way you could allocate it towards your fitness goals and your mental and physical health a lot more. So putting yourself first, and that includes in partnerships too, so whenever you get in a partnership, ask yourself, am I just being an actor in this partnership? Am I just putting on this facade to make it work? You know what I mean? Or am I being your true self? So the more of a facade you put on, first of all, the person never even knows your true self. So how's that relationship going to possibly work, long term? It's not. The only way it could possibly, quote unquote, work is if, like, you see couples stay together for like 20, 30 years, and of course they're together, but it's kind of like continues to be a miserable existence. So it's obviously not worth it. So put yourself first, you must know. Yeah, so to put yourself first, obviously you must know yourself. So a lot of, especially things I do with my program is helping clients identify their core values, which act kind of like as a blueprint to who they are overall. Making sure they don't have like a story gap, making sure they don't have love-hate relationships in their life, making sure they don't pursue activities that just leave them feel a lot more empty in their life. And a huge piece of the puzzle too of the coaching program is just to make them consciously aware if the people in their life are also encouraging a lot of their pathologies that they're trying to avoid, even if it's unintentional. Like, for example, we had Thanksgiving recently, and it's the holidays too. It's almost New Year's. So you'll notice a lot of times in the dinner table, you have a lot of family members, they're sitting around, and maybe, the ones in their 30s or 40s are kind of like, oh, I have this health issue, I don't like how overweight I am, I have blood pressure and this and that. But then they're kind of like at the same time encouraging you to eat the very same food that's most likely leading to their pathology while sitting at the same table telling you about that pathology. So it's so under the radar, and pathology, like I mentioned many times, has been so normalized in today's culture. It's just completely unconscious and acceptable today to be basically fat, on a bunch of medical drugs. This is seen as like normal, where it's huge signs of pathology, and something's terribly wrong in that case, And the fact that it's been normalized is very startling and disturbing. So yeah, core values, huge. Also doing a lot of work with identifying the person's, false self, and helping them identify patterns of how they maintain that false self, and then tying it back to their false core, which once again makes it a lot more clear on what their real core values are, so that they could allocate their attention to those core values in a confident, productive, and healthy way. So there's so much more to it, and honestly, I can go on for hours with stuff like this, but I'm going to cut it short today because I just want to enjoy my weekend and go watch a movie or two. But those are some areas you can focus on that will go way above and beyond just thinking of your goals as, I just need to change my nutrition and I just need to change my workout program. You could easily, there's a time and place for that, and that stuff is important for sure. But the way people use it is more of, once again, falling into those symptom management loops. Try to get rid of the source of the problem instead of constantly trying to battle and solve the problem. Get rid of the source of the problems first. So get to the etiology of problems, and that's the only way. That's literally the only way to do it. So some other things you can do in 2023 is, if you go to your doctor and you go there with some random stuff, high blood pressure, and they say, hey, take these blood pressure medications, but wait a minute, high blood pressure, hypertension, too much. What does hyper mean? Too much tension. Okay, shouldn't I be working on reducing my tension, cleaning up my diet, maybe working remote, maybe working less hours, maybe not taking that stressful promotion when I'm already overburdened and defeated, even in my current position? How's taking blood pressure medication going to really help me in turn? Or is it going to just continue to enable me to keep being kind of like the dummy that's led me to all these situations to begin with? What do you think is going to work out better for you? That's up to you to decide, but the answer is obvious to me. And same thing with, like, If you go to personal trainers, I'm not going to leave them out either. The fitness industry is full of a bunch of symptom management as well. You know, you go to a trainer, they chat with you for like 5 minutes, where actually like a competent assessment takes about 3 to 4 hours. They have you sign a waiver. Bam, let's get started. Let's start working out. They have like a very overweight person that's stress eating and emotionally eating to cope with their stress. And how's a boot camp going to help this person? You know, they probably have a bunch of like joint pain too that hasn't been assessed for. They just throw them on a treadmill with like 15 other people with random issues as well. They're all in the same program. How's that going to help the person overcome that? You know, so there's another example of very clear symptom management. Tim, let me see what I wrote there. It's always get to remind people with podcasts. Nope, no worries, Tim. We got to catch up too and do another podcast as well. It'll be good to chat with you. I know a lot has changed since we were coaching together. So, okay, so there you go, guys. There's some common sense, straightforward solutions to increase the chance of you succeeding in 2023. And remember, if nothing changes, nothing changes. So if you just keep doing the same stuff, don't expect anything different in 2003. If you just change minor little stuff here and there, but really just the core of everything you're doing remains the same, don't expect any change. It's just going to get worse for you. The only way to change is to change. And most people need to change a lot in various aspects of their life. And I'm working on stuff myself still as well. So I'm definitely not out of this category of people either. I'm totally in it too. I got stuff to work on as well. So I wish you guys the best. Greg, thank you. Bebo, thank you for jumping in. Tim, I see a bunch of other people here. Jim, good to see you guys. Tori, I don't know if I pronounced the name right. Good to see you. Lisa, thank you for always jumping in. David, Jose, Joao. That one's tough. Yeah, not that good with name. Preston, Richard, good to see you guys. And a few others. Okay, guys, have a good weekend, and wishing you guys the best, okay? Remember, if you have a rock stuck inside your shoe, take the rock out. Stop walking with pain. Don't keep the rock there and take painkillers instead, okay? Stop the symptom management loop that really gets you nowhere except short-term results, and then always back with the same problem. Thank you, guys. Take care.